In this week's lectures, we talked about several of the components of the immune system. And one of the great questions that came in was, how do these different components, in particular the innate and the adaptive immune system, how do they work together? Do they synergize with each other? Do they conflict with each other? Does the upregulation of one response lead to a downregulation of the other, and in fact make you more susceptible to infection with something that perhaps would be targeted with the other? And again, I think there are a number of really great examples of this, both in the plant and the animal world. Right? And Mary, you might have some good comments on the role of this in animal immunity.
So, from an evolutionary perspective, those two systems have to be coordinated. Right? The innate system evolved first, and the adaptive system has evolved to receive signals specifically from the innate system. And so they can't operate independently. The other thing that's important is that you can mount individual responses. So you can be infected, you may have an infection in your thumb, and you may have a respiratory infection. You're mounting those the responses to those infections often independently. You must have the capability to respond to multiple foreign agents at the same time. And so when it works, we don't pay any attention to the successes. That all of this, we're really multitasking all the time, right? So when can these interfere? Well, if a signal is inappropriately given, okay? There's a lot of regulation to make sure that, a lot of checkpoints that say, was this signal really received? Okay, we're going to go to the next step, and then we're going to check again, and check again, and check again. So lots of checks and balances, but it's biology, and occasionally we see something where the regulation is off. And that's where we see disease. And again, we come back to this point that the majority of infections don't lead to disease. Okay, and disease can often be caused by an inappropriate immunological response. So I think that in a couple of weeks we'll have some specific examples of where these two systems get out of sync. But the majority of the time they must work together, and it's really quite an elegant choreographed dance.
And so, do we have do we have the same analogs of innate and adaptive immunity in the plant world?
We do. It's a little different. So we have innate immunity. Plants make a lot of compounds, antimicrobial compounds that enhance their immunity, or they do things like they trigger apoptosis in infected cells.
That's localized death of cells.
Right. So they kill off the cells that are infected to prevent spread. But then there is also a very important adaptive immune system in plants that was only discovered about 15 or 20 years ago, and that's the siRNA system. So plants that are infected, this is especially effective against viruses. Plants that are infected with a virus will make these small RNAs, small interfering RNAs that are specific to the virus that they're infected with, and these destroy the viral genome. So they anneal to the virus, the RNA or DNA, and basically trigger it being wiped out. So that's an adaptive immune system in plants. It's different than animal systems, not only because the whole system is different, but also because it doesn't have the same kind of memory. So if a plant is able to clear an infection, you don't find those specific adaptive molecules there anymore. And so as far as we know, it doesn't have an enhanced ability to counteract the same virus coming in again. On the other hand, there's been almost no studies of plant infections, repeated infections with the same virus, because all the work we do in crop plants, we just the plants die or they're called out or something. So we don't really look much at plants actually clearing viruses. So we don't really know. We know in wild plants that they can be reinfected or they can clear viruses, but there's been very little study on that.
And this actually gets to an important distinction in how we study infections in animals and plants. And because of the memory that's inherent in the adaptive immune system, the antibodies that are circulating, we can actually test for the presence of prior infection in animal systems, and we don't have a good analog of that in plant systems. So it's hard to look at a cross section, a snapshot in time, and look back and see what have long-lived plants experienced in the past.
Of course, now bacteria have a long-lived immunity. I don't know if you brought that up or not, but CRISPRs give you the long history of what they've been exposed to.
But much of our understanding of immunity, particularly in animals, comes from studies of laboratory mice.
Right.
And I think when you start going away from the basic mammalian system, we know very little. We know very little about immunity in reptiles, amphibians and fish, and in the invertebrates as well. So there's a huge area of research still needed here.
Right.
But the one thing it always tells me is, there are these very complex, important responses by the animal, whoever it is. And it shows you that it is such an important selective force that parasites and pathogens have just been very important in the life history of all living organisms.